Hi, I'm Warrick from Harder Steenbeck, and today I'm going to be taking you through the instructions for the Ultra 2024. We decided to make these available on our public channel because I think it's really useful for you to see exactly how our airbrushes support you, whether you already own one or you're just thinking about getting one. The Ultra is kind of unique because it's got a number of features that we've engineered into it to support the learning of a beginner or a new user, so that you can master the double action trigger, so that you can get the right settings for basing, priming, and the various stages of highlighting directly from the engineering in the airbrush. This puts you in a great position to get the most out of any other tool in the future. So let's get right into it. One of the things that we're very proud of here at Harder Steenbeck is that every airbrush that we sell is tested by an airbrush professional before it leaves our factory. We do this to make sure that you've got perfect performance out of the box every time. So the first thing that I'd like you to do with your airbrush is to put some color in it and start painting with it, because it's in perfect condition right now. Please don't strip it to try to see what the parts are before you paint with it. Paint with it first, and then we'll take you through the cleaning and so on after we've had some fun doing what we bought it for, which is to paint with it. So first things first, how do we get the airbrush connected to our air source? So what compressor should you have? A compressor is basically an air pump, so don't overcomplicate it. You want something that's going to give your airbrush a nice steady flow of air, ideally anywhere from 1.5 to 2 bar in pressure, which is in the order of 20 to 25 pounds per square inch, or PSI. The Harder Steenbeck airbrushes come with a 1/8 BSP thread on the bottom of the airbrush, or 2.7 millimeter NPT as we refer to it here in Germany. And we also provide it with a little quick disconnect tail. If you have a hose with a quick disconnect on the end, you simply push it on to connect it. To disconnect it, you pull the sleeve on the hose and it'll just pop off. If you have a hose with an end that looks like this, just the thread, that's no problem. Just unscrew the quick disconnect tail from your airbrush, and then you can screw the hose directly onto it, like that. You don't need to use the quick disconnect. It's just there as a convenience if you have a hose with that feature. If not, not a problem. Just screw it directly into the hose like that. I'm going to assume that you're using water-based acrylic paints, as so many airbrush users are nowadays. But if you're using solvent-based paints, don't worry. All of the seals and O-rings in the Ultra airbrush that contact paint are all completely solvent-proof. Now, as I said earlier, the first thing that we're going to do is we're not going to talk about it too much. We're going to start shooting paint right away. But before we do, there's a couple of things I suggest you have to hand. It's really useful to have an old paintbrush somewhere in the size of, let me say, a 6 to a 10. Okay, I'll explain later why you want that sort of size. You want something pretty inexpensive with fairly stiff bristles, but a little bit of quality so that you're fairly certain that the bristles aren't going to break off. It's also useful to have a mug with some water on your desk as well, with a little bit of airbrush cleaner mixed into that perhaps. The other thing that I'm going to strongly recommend that you have on your table is one of these spray out pots. I've got one here from Sparmax. The reason why I really like them is simply because when you're cleaning out the airbrush and you're spraying a lot of cleaner through it and getting rid of some paint, it prevents that from becoming airborne and just captures it in a jar. If you want to get started right away and you don't have one of these in, get yourself an old yogurt pot, cut a little bit of a slot in it, put some liquid in it, and put an old cloth in there. And then you can put the airbrush in the hole, spray it out, and the wet cloth will do a great job of capturing most of that spray. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop a bit of game color ink into the bottom of this lid here and just see how it behaves when we dip something into it and see how the drip comes off. We want to load that up with paint. We want to look at how that's going to drip. Now, if I bring this vertical, you're going to see that the drip forms, and when it breaks, there's no elasticity on that drip. Now that's the key. You don't want that drip to stretch and drop off. If it does that, the paint is going to be too thick to airbrush. I'm going to leave this in here, and we're going to do the same thing with a little bit of their brush paint. So a similar color. This is the game color Bloody Red. Give it a bit of a shake. And what you're going to notice right away is, of course, we know that this color is going to be thicker. But when we look to see how it's going to drip, it's going to be a massive difference. So we'll get the end of that paintbrush nicely covered in paint, and lift it out, and you can see right away the strip has got a huge amount of elasticity to it. Okay, it really pulls out long before it falls off and breaks. That elasticity in the drip is what you don't want in an airbrush preparation. Now, even with a brush paint, we can modify that and change it so it's going to work in the airbrush. So if we get some Vallejo airbrush thinner, with the regular paints, you're going to have to put in a little bit more than 1:1. So I'm going to say closer to 2:1 to get the property that we want. We give it a bit of a mix here. And now if we load that end of that paintbrush up now and pull it out, what we're going to see, I think, okay, there's still some elasticity on that drip. So we're going to need to put a little bit more thinner in to get this to be an optimal airbrush formulation. So let's give that a good mix again. Let's take another look at how that drip forms. So we'll load that end up really nicely with some paint. And let's take a look at that drip. Okay, so now we're looking at it from here, and that didn't really extend before it just broke off and fell. So I'm going to say that this is now an acceptable formulation for the airbrush. So I'm going to use a blue color to start with. So make sure your paint is well shaken. I've pre-shaken this before we got on the camera. And start out, always put the thinner into the airbrush first. So I'm going to put in, let's say, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 drops of thinner in there. And then we just load the paint in on top of that. Once it's in there, we'll mix it. Once it's in there, we're going to mix it with the back end of our old paintbrush, because that's just a really easy thing that we already know we've got to hand. So just give it a bit of a wriggle around in there. Now that we've got some color mixed in the airbrush, I'd like to explain the double action trigger to you. Now, a conventional double action trigger has got 2 planes of motion, up and down and back and forth. Up and down controls the air. When you push it down, it switches the air on. When you pull it back, it progressively opens the paint flow more the further you pull it back, and less the further forward it is, to the point where when it's all the way forward, the paint flow is shut off. Now, the correct way to operate a double action trigger is you push it down first to start the airflow, then you progressively pull it back to start the paint flow to the amount that you desire. When you've finished the stroke you want to make, you push the trigger forward to shut the paint flow, and then you let it up to stop the airflow. Now, typically for beginners, this is a challenge because you don't have the muscle memory to do that. And so you end up having some negative experiences in your first strokes with the airbrush because you don't have that ability yet. What we've done in the Ultra 2024 is we've created the trigger so that you cannot pull it back to start the paint until you first pushed it down. So you see, I can't pull it back until I push it down, and then it moves back freely. So this will guide you into having the perfect double action trigger technique. So now we're ready for our first strokes. What I'd like you to do is turn the color control collar to position 2. Okay, this is like a moderate detail stroke that you typically use for second highlights, and it's designed to be used at a distance of approximately 2 fingers away from the surface that you're painting. Typically when you're airbrushing, if you're very, very close, you'll have a very, very small trigger movement. If you're further away, you're looking for broader coverage, you need more paint flow, you'll pull the trigger back further. This collar gives you that control in a metered way that you can understand which application to use for which kind of stroke you're going to do. So let's start out with setting number 2, approximately 2 fingers away from your paper. Push the trigger down, pull it all the way back to the stop, and you'll see a dot develop there on your paper. What I'd like you to do next is just move the airbrush around in a figure of 8, perhaps, at the same distance, and just lay some color down, and just see these strokes that you can create with the airbrush. Understand that if you stop moving it, you'll get too much building up. So the key is to keep moving. And just make this nice kind of 3 millimeter wide stroke on your paper. Once you've done that, experiment a little bit with learning how to aim. So put down some dots, various positions. And then what you want to do is try to come back to those dots and start a stroke on that dot to connect those dots. Always pulling the trigger all the way back to the stop that you've created by setting the color control collar and keeping approximately 2 fingers width away from your page. Now, if you followed that, you should have created something that looks similar to what I have here, which is a great start to your airbrushing. Let's pull over a new page and learn some other basic techniques. Now, everybody always wonders how fine can they go with the airbrush? And the great thing about this new Ultra is it gives the ability to start experimenting with that right out of the box. So, turn your control collar to position 3, and this is designed for you to be very close to the surface that you're painting. And remember, in the previous exercise, we kept the airbrush moving in this fluid way. Push the trigger down, pull it all the way back to the stop, just let the color develop on the surface, and you can see that we can put down some nice fine lines with the setup. So just experiment with that so that you can see how you can create some finer lines with the airbrush. Obviously it can go a lot finer than this, but this setting just enables you to gain a foothold and start experimenting with creating some detail with the airbrush. I'd also like you to experiment with some blending. So this is where you're using the airbrush to throw a bit more paint and you're just looking to blend the color progressively over a surface. So for that, we're going to switch it over to setting number 1, which allows the trigger to come back further, shifts more paint, and for this, you want to be approximately 1 hand's width away from the surface that you're painting. So a little bit further away than you were before. And again, push the trigger down, pull it all the way back to the stop, and then just watch that color develop as a nice blend on the surface that you're painting. Now you'll notice that what I'm doing when I change direction is that I'm turning the trigger off as I come to the end of the stroke, and I'm switching it back on once I've changed direction. If I don't do that, because I'll have this pause at the end, you'll see I'll get a little bit of a color buildup at either end of the stroke. So do practice this idea that you start moving, pull the trigger back, I come off before I stop, come back in the other direction, I turn it back on. So you can hear the change in sound as I do that. And that way you avoid getting darker ends to these areas that you're painting. In terms of applying what you've just done on your paper, in terms of the different settings that you've used with the color control collar, in terms of applying that to painting a model, if you're a miniature painter, please have a look on our channel and you'll see there's a video there called the painting process with our new Ultra. And that'll take you through how each of these steps on the color control wheel is applied to painting a Space Marine really quickly. And it's a great first project to have with your new airbrush. As we're painting for quite some time now, you probably will have come across the beginnings of a clog. If you feel your airbrush starting to spray in consistently, or you feel that it's starting to slow down in how it's spraying, this is probably because you've got some color drying on the tip of your needle. Now the great news is that every airbrush clog begins with color drying on the tip of the needle. If you catch it at that stage and you deal with it, you'll never experience an airbrush clog. And this is the third revolutionary aspect to the new Ultra. We've created an air cap where you can always see the needle tip, you can access it well enough to clean the needle tip, but it always remains protected. So if you take a look at this air cap at the front here, you'll notice that you can see straight through it and you can see the needle tip in there. Now I'll wager that you can probably see a little bit of this blue color dried on this needle tip here. This is where your mug with your bit of cleaner and water comes in. Just basically get your brush, remember a number 6 to 10 size paintbrush is perfect, and just jam it into these holes on the air cap. From 3 of the 4 sides is enough. And what you'll be doing there is those bristles will be getting onto that needle tip and cleaning it up. A couple of taps just to clear that out of there, and the next stroke that you make, that needle tip will now be perfectly clean and your airbrush will now be away from getting any kind of paint clogging. So it's a really, really simple way to stay abreast of ever having a clog in your airbrush. Keep an eye on that needle tip. As soon as you see any color drying on it, just deal with it in that way. You don't have to be gentle. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to damage it, because as long as you use the larger size of brush, the ferrule can't go in through those holes and damage either the nozzle or the needle tip. Only the bristles will go in, clean it up, and you'll be good to go. You'll notice that there's another 2 settings on the color control collar. We've got base and prime, both of which give you slightly more trigger pullback than the settings 1, 2, and 3. These are particularly useful for plastic modeling. We've called them base and prime for a reason. It's typically used to do your priming or your basing. Both of them are used, again, with your airbrush approximately 1 hand's width away from your model. It's based on the idea that you always thin your paints 1 to 1, 1 part paint with 1 part thinner. And just remember, always put the thinner into the airbrush before the paint and then mix it in the cup. I'm not going to go into a lot more detail about the painting techniques because we've got a lot of other content about that, some from us and some from wonderful artists who've been with Harder Steenbeck for a while and have created lots and lots of fantastic educational content in whichever specific area of airbrushing that you're looking to get involved with. But I would urge you, practice those basic exercises that we did together a moment before until you feel fairly confident with the airbrush, and quickly get on to painting what you actually want to paint. I'm sure you didn't buy the airbrush to practice. I'm sure you bought the airbrush to get creative. So get onto that as early as possible and start enjoying yourself. The system on this airbrush means that you can very quickly start going onto the pieces that are meaningful to you without being fearful that you're going to paint them badly, because this system really does give you the control to do it really easily and really rather well from the start. Now, of course, we've shot some paint through the airbrush now, so now we have to think about how do we clean it. Now, the general rule that I want to give you is clean your airbrush in between colors to the point where it's totally clean. What that means is when you come back to it at the end of the day, there's no big cleaning operation to be done. I firmly believe that your end of day clean should be pretty much the same as your in between colors clean. The other rule that I'd really like to have you keep firmly in your mind is if the doorbell rings or your telephone rings or something happens while you're painting, please don't ever leave your airbrush with paint in it. It's just going to give you a headache when you come back to it. Just quickly point it into your spray out pot, pull the trigger all the way back, get rid of all the color in the airbrush, put some cleaner in there, spray that through until it's running through clear, and then you can walk away and come back to it and clean it properly later. But that's a really good general house rule to try to create with your airbrushing. So, getting back to the cleaning. The first thing we want to do is turn the control wheel to the point where you've got full travel on the trigger so that you can pull it all the way back to expel all of the color that's in the airbrush. Place it into your spray out pot and just pull that trigger all the way back, get everything out of there. You'll notice the sound changes when all the paint is gone. After you've sprayed out the color, get a hold of your airbrush cleaner. Now please, always use the cleaner that comes from the same brand as the paint that you were using. Same goes for thinner, by the way. Always use the thinner that comes from the same brand as whatever paint you're using. So, get your cleaner, just put enough in there just to kind of cover about that much of the bottom of the cup. However much your color was up to, that's how much cleaner you put in. And you'll notice when I spray it out, I pump the trigger back and forth. Now the reason for that is because I want to clean the full length of the needle. So I pump the trigger back and forth, spray out what's in there. But once I've done that, at this point, I'll have almost all the color out of the airbrush and a little bit of color residue in the cup. And this is where you can use a little bit of paper towel, typically on the pinky finger, tends to fit in there pretty well, or your forefinger actually on this bigger cup. And just get in there and just wipe out the most part of the color that's remaining. It just saves you having to spray lots and lots of cleaner through there. When you look in there now, it's already pretty clean. Throw a little bit more cleaner in there. And again, get it in there and just pump the trigger and work it backwards and forwards really well. That would have gotten rid of almost all the color that's in the airbrush. The next thing you want to do, get your paintbrush again and just clean around the front side here. Get in all of those 4 holes around the side of the airbrush. If you've been having a really long painting session, then carefully you can just go in the front here, but be quite gentle with that. Give it a little massage there with the brush. And if you feel the need to, get the brush down inside there and give it a little bit of a clean inside there as well. Dump a tiny bit more cleaner in there. Get your airbrush back into your spray out pot. And again, pump the trigger. Spray out what's in there. And then finally, all you really have to do is just give it a bit of a wipe. If you've got any residues on the outside of the airbrush from your cleaning, you want to get rid of those. And now if we can get a bit of a close-up on the airbrush here, what you'll see is that there's really no color left anywhere around this front end. There's no color left in the cup. If I pull the cup itself out at this point, then you'll see that even inside the hole that takes the cup, there's really no color visible in there. Now there's two reasons for this. One, because the finish that we machine to inside the airbrush is really, really high here at Harder Steenbeck. And secondly, it's because we actually put our deposition electrodes for our plating processes also inside the cups. So the surface finish inside them is very, very, very high, and it cleans very, very easily. So don't overdo your cleaning. Do you need to use ultrasonic baths and so on? No, you really don't. I'll demonstrate that to you now. If I remove the needle, which remember has been immersed in paint throughout this whole painting session, if I pull it out now, let's have a really good look at that. Have we got any color left on that at all? Okay, we've got a tiny little bit here, just where it goes through the seal. If I just run that through my fingers, that's gone. And there's a tiny bit on the tip, and I can wipe that off like this, just by dragging it across the back of my hand, rotating it while I do it. Now the needle tip is perfectly clean. I can put that back in. And contrary to probably what you've heard from lots and lots of people, that is really all you need to do to clean your airbrush at the end of a painting session, as long as you've cleaned it well in between your color changes. Now, if you're not confident in that yourself and you want to do a little bit of a more thorough job, then I'll just run you through that now. And this also is the part where I'm going to show you how to strip your airbrush. So the cup on the Ultra, you just pull it out. Okay, so if you can't get it out, just give it a bit of a twist and it'll come freely out. If you want to wash that up somewhere else, then you can do that. Again, you shouldn't need to if you've cleaned it well in between colors. To remove the needle, unscrew the end piece of the airbrush, remove the color control collar, it just pulls off. And then this item here, which is the needle clamp nut, you just loosen it off by a half a turn or something, and the needle will just pull straight out the back. You can also pull it out the front if you wish. This is really just a matter of preference. People who take it out the front like to do that because they say it protects the tip more when they're putting it back, if they put it in from the front. People who like to take it out the back say they do that because it's just more convenient. We don't mind which way you do it. You can do it either which way. To take the head off, you simply unscrew it. Now make sure before you do this that you've loosened your needle nut and pulled your needle slightly back. To take the head off, you simply unscrew this. Do that carefully, and you'll see that your nozzle sits inside the airhead. Here it is, okay? You'll notice that none of these parts seem to have any paint on them, okay? So just to sort of reinforce the fact to you that you don't need to over clean your airbrush. If you want to take the needle out the front, push it through, pull it through from there. If you want to replace it from the front, you just simply push it in from the front. It just goes in like that. If you want to put it in from the back, we've designed the needle nut so that it's got a special taper in it that it's very difficult to misalign this needle when you're putting it back in. Okay, so it's really easy to put in, and you just push it in and it self-aligns due to the shaping inside this new needle nut. Once the needle's out, if you wish to strip the back end of your airbrush, and I will say that this is something that you really only need to probably do if you're airbrushing a lot, once a month. And the only reason why you do it then is just to put maybe a little bit of lubricant on the moving parts, but you shouldn't find that you're getting paint in the back there. If you do want to strip it though, needle nut comes off, then the needle spring screw comes off, the needle spring comes out, the needle guide comes out, and then you're able to pull the trigger out the top. If you want to remove your air valve, unscrew the quick disconnect tail, and then the air valve just unscrews like this. Now, if you've got your airbrush into a terribly dirty state and you do want to ultrasonically clean it, I'd recommend that you don't put your air valve in there. It's just not necessary to do that. This only sees air. You don't need to clean this part, so always remove it before you put your airbrush in an ultrasonic cleaner. I would urge you not to bother buying an ultrasonic cleaner. If you do have one and you really want to use it, try not to do it more than once a month. If you find you have to, it's really because you are probably not cleaning your airbrush well enough in between colors anyway. And that is a fully stripped Ultra airbrush. There is one more seal that sits right down here inside the body, and that's called the needle seal. That is now made from a fully machined PTFE material. It's pretty much a lifetime seal. We don't expect that you'll ever need to replace it. If you do, you just go in there with our screwdriver, which will get it out and put a new one in. But I'd really encourage you not to worry about removing that or trying to clean it or anything, because you really shouldn't have to. And we factory set it to a very specific torque. So it's better just left in there. And in our experience, its lifetime is measured in tens of years, not tens of weeks. Getting your airbrush back together. We start off by screwing the air valve on. Make sure this little white seal is still there on the top. Don't lose that. So you just screw that in until it stops, and you'll notice you don't need any tools with the Harder Steenbeck, and that's one of the core principles of our airbrushes, to keep them simple. We don't want to have to use miniature tools to put them together and strip them. The trigger assembly now can only go in one way. The X center doesn't rotate, so you just put it in the only way that it goes in, down through the slot here, and you'll know you've got it in correctly when you feel it engage with the spring on the air valve. The next part that goes in is the needle guide. Now, I just want to draw your attention to the machining on this part. You can see it's got these kind of spirals machined into the surface here. We call this rifling. This is the bearing surface that this part slides on. I'd encourage you to use a little bit of lubricant on here. We prefer an Iwata product called Super Lube because it doesn't interfere with paint. And the purpose of these little riflings is so that you can put some lubricant in there, just a little, and then as this part slides back and forth over a period of the month or so that you're going to have it in there, that lubricant will gradually release and keep the whole airbrush feeling perfectly lubricated and extremely smooth. So you slide that in. As you come up to the trigger, rotate it, and you'll feel it lock into place. Push it forward, pick up your spring. If you want to put a tiny bit of lubricant on this as well, go ahead, but it's not strictly necessary. Then you pick up the needle tensioning screw. Screw that on the back. On the Ultra, we recommend you screw it all the way in. Then take your needle nut, screw it on until it stops, and then unscrew it by about 1/4 to 1/3 of a turn. If you prefer to put your needle in from the front, do that now, and then push it in until you cannot see the tip in the front. If you don't prefer to put your needle in from the front, then the next step is to put the nozzle and the air cap on. Now, take a look at this. There's no color visible on these parts. We've done really nothing else to clean them. If you would like to clean them more, again, just pick up your big brush, give it a little bit of a clean like that. Be very careful that you don't touch the tip of the nozzle with the ferrule, but you shouldn't find you need to do that. Slip that inside the air cap like this. No threads, nothing to need a tool for, and then you just pop it in the front, screw it down until it's good and finger tight. If you're putting your needle in from the back, now's the time that you put it in. The needle nut self-guides it pretty well, so you don't need to concentrate too hard on that, but a little bit of concentration is recommended. And then gently push it in until you feel it stop in the nozzle. Once it stops, give it a light twist just to seat it. Tighten up your needle nut, and that's your airbrush mechanically fully back together. The color control collar just slides on. There's only one way it can go on, so put it on that way. You don't need to push it home, just hang it on there and then get the end piece and just screw it on until everything lines up and locks in. And that is your first full clean and strip of your airbrush. I hope that that was pretty easy for you to follow. If not, then just go through it and pause bit by bit. But please do remember that we really don't regard that it's necessary that you strip your airbrush after every session. I'd encourage you to try to do your cleaning well enough in between colors that that's never necessary, because it just adds a lot of time to your airbrush sessions. And really, what did you buy it for? You bought it to paint with, not to clean. I hope you have a great time with your new airbrush, and I'd like to thank you again for choosing Harder Steenbeck. If you need any additional help, please reach out to our team, either on social media or by emailing us. And apart from that, we wish you great creative success with your new airbrush from Harder Steenbeck.